Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. It's me, Dr. Cindy, your Johns Hopkins and Yale trained fertility specialist, obstetrician, gynecologist, PhD trained virologist, and vaccine biologist. I'm a bit late in starting because I was still working on getting my desktop to work, but whenever you plan something amazing, technology tries to work against you. So of course, today the problem is that my internet seems to be going in and out. I'm reloading the desktop and I'm talking to you from the laptop right now. And for those on Instagram, I'm talking to you via my phone. But what I'm not sure about right now is whether people can actually hear me out there on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or is it frozen for you as well? I just wanted to come on though so that you guys would know that I still planned on being here. I'm working through these technical difficulties, but I hope to get it sorted within the next couple minutes. I even have some surprise guests joining me today. Some of my friends who have been actively following the whole COVID situation as well as the vaccine trials and the work. So Dr. Amy is telling me there is a lag. Thank you so much, Dr. Amy. So I'm working on figuring that out. This is the time when my desktop decided to update things. I'm a Mac user. I like Apple products, but I think right now Apple is sort of working against me. So Madison Arnold says, we can hear you, but your video is a little behind. Okay, hopefully we're all caught up. Like I said, I'm coming to you via my laptop as opposed to the desktop typically. But for those who have never really heard me speak before, I'm Dr. Cindy Duke. I'm a Johns Hopkins and Yale trained OBGYN, reproductive endocrinologist, infertility specialist who's based in Las Vegas, Nevada. But I'm also a PhD trained virologist who actually spent a long time working on my PhD, learning to use viruses, work with viruses, using viruses to manipulate the human immune response, specifically as it related to viral vaccine development, design, and also for clinical trials. I have been actively bringing you guys information, as you know, from the very beginning of this pandemic. And we've talked about all things related to the pandemic. And indeed, we even started talking about the outlook for potential vaccines. I certainly shared a couple months ago that in China and Russia, they had advanced a couple vaccine candidates and were actually already dispensing it to their military. And finally, here in the United States, in the United Kingdom, we now have emergency use authorization for vaccines that have completed what we call a combined phase 1, phase 2/3 trial. And, I've been getting lots of messages from so many of you asking me questions like, well, don't you think that was too fast? Is there something amiss given how quickly a vaccine candidate is available, given that even you, Dr. Cindy, were telling people that it could take up to 3 to 5 years to have a vaccine candidate? Do you trust it? Would you take the vaccine? Would you recommend your family or your friends, your patients, take the vaccine? And as I listened to all the questions, I realized that it might be best to just come live and share what I know, share the information that we have on the vaccines, and to bring some friends. I think everybody's concerns are valid. My hope today is that by the time we're done talking, you would at least gain a better appreciation for the data, better confidence in the data, and better confidence in how you can make your decision about whether or not to get vaccinated and which vaccine candidate to take. I know we live in an era where many of us feel distrust. There's so much information coming at us quickly. But I want to let you know today, one, my first disclaimer is I am not being paid by any pharmaceutical or vaccine company to give this talk today. I haven't been asked by anyone to give this talk. Nor am I here because I have some sort of financial gain to receive in any way as a result of talking to people about vaccines. Like you, I wanted to wait for the information, and indeed, information has been coming. There's now been a publication in our landmark journal here in the United States, known as the New England Journal of Medicine, looking at the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna vaccine has also been seen, some of the data published in the Lancet journal in the United Kingdom. The AstraZeneca vaccine candidate, which is likely to be unavailable to us in the United States, but given that my audience is so broad, my audience includes listeners and viewers in the United Kingdom, in the Caribbean, in Australia, in India, in the Philippines, I wanted to make sure we touched on the AstraZeneca vaccine today. I also have a good friend of mine, a physician, scientist, and former World Health Organization expert who's based in India, joining me as well today to talk about his experience in India and his own outlook in terms of how he feels about the vaccine candidates, including a vaccine candidate that's actually developed in India as well and being studied there. I also have one of my friends, Dr. Angela Duke. She has the same last name as me. We probably have distant relatives, who knows? We do have similar heritage in some ways. She will be joining me in her capacity. She's also a physician, but she's joining primarily as a mother, a wife, and someone who's been following the stories and her take on the vaccines and whether or not she and or her family will be opting to have the vaccine, and if so, when. And so I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. So let's just start off with what we do know, which is we're now at the 1 year mark of the emergence of SARS-CoV-2, which is this novel virus that was initially recognized amongst patients presenting in Wuhan, China, with these constellation of symptoms that progressed into something really worrisome. We quickly watched it spread, and eventually we started hearing of it not just on mainland China, but hearing of cases in Italy, hearing about cases traveling across Europe, Italy, Spain. Ultimately, by mid-March, it was in New York City. We saw what happened in New York, and we watched that wave of coronavirus infections spread across the United States. And to this day, we're still battling with COVID-19. Some people are of the opinion that we're now into a second wave of infections across the United States, for example, and in the United Kingdom. Others, myself included, are not clear whether or not we're really in a second wave or we're still dealing with the effects of our first wave, which was not fully contained, right? It was really just migrating, not necessarily contained. We've learned a lot about SARS-CoV-2 over the past year. And so we've gone from what is this virus? How infectious is it? How transmissible is it? How dangerous is it? Who is most at risk from this virus, to now being at a stage where we know what the virus is. We understand a lot more about its genome. We understand a lot more about its clinical presentation. We've learned a lot about clinical management. That said, we don't yet have effective treatments for it. And so those were one of the two things we were fighting for, was effective treatments and also a vaccine, if possible. Now, I think the first thing to talk about today is vaccines. And what do we expect when we talk about vaccines? I think for most people, when we hear vaccine in lay terms, we presume it's something designed to prevent infection ever, right? When people hear the word vaccine, they're not thinking that a vaccine could be something that even if you were infected, it helps you fight it off. Yet, as a virologist, I can tell you that there are different kinds of vaccines. So there are vaccines which are prophylactic, meaning they prevent infection entirely. There are vaccines that are more of a therapeutic style, which is they will cause an infection, but then over time help you from becoming too sick or help you from getting to the point of requiring severe interventions, like being admitted to the hospital, being put on oxygen, having a tube down your throat to help you breathe with a ventilator. And so the first step was talking about this COVID vaccine. So the first thing I like to remind people of is when we're talking about viral infections, the immune response that's needed to fight off a viral infection is often very different from the immune response that one would see elicited for a bacterial infection or some other type of infectious cause. And I think it's important for people to hear that, because right now, one of the things I've recognized across the country is that people seem to have some unrealistic expectations of how immunity to viruses work and how our bodies fight viruses. So typically, if you have a cell in your body that's infected by a virus, the infection happens, and then because a virus needs to get into a cell to take over your cell's machinery to make more of itself, in the process of making more of itself, it has to send its proteins to the surface. Imagine your cell being a house. When a vaccine comes through the front door of your house, a virus. When a virus enters the front door of your house, one of the things it has to do as it starts preparing to burst through the roof of your house is it starts repainting the outside walls of your house. And in the process of repainting the outside walls, your immune system notices, hey, that paint's different. That paint isn't our paint. That's not the body's paint. And your immune response as a result starts making its own specialized soldiers to get rid of what's happening to that infected house. Of course, if the virus is really good and it's infected a lot of houses within your body, then as it's popping open those roofs to release new versions of itself to go find other houses to invade, the immune system can become overwhelmed. And we've certainly seen that in COVID, where we're seeing a lot of people as they get really big infections, meaning the dose or the inoculum, the bigger the inoculum, we've noticed the sicker people get, the more transmissible virus is, the response, the immune response, or what we call a cytokine storm, as well as other chemicals released as part of your immune response, can really make you quite sick. And so when you're looking to develop a viral vaccine, the question isn't necessarily only how do we prevent the virus from coming in that front door to the house, meaning prevent it from invading a cell. That's one of the goals if we can, but in viruses, it's not very common that we can do that. But the goal would be that we prepare the soldiers of your body, your immune system, so that the moment the house starts displaying new paint, the cells know what to do and they take care of the house before the roof pops open and all the viruses come out to go look for new houses. And so that's really the goal of a vaccine when you're looking at a virus. So from the moment I started thinking about COVID and how it's working, and SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, I understood very early on that the people who are designing this vaccine would need to figure out not just a way of hopefully blocking it from entering the house, but also if it got into the house, how do we prevent it from replicating itself and making so many more that it can burst the roof open? And so that was the first question that was asked and the design was set about. So currently we have 3 big candidates that we're all talking about in the United States and the United Kingdom. 2 of them are based on very similar technology. One is the Pfizer vaccine. The other one is the Moderna vaccine. And they are using something known as mRNA, or messenger ribonucleic acid. So if you think of mRNA, mRNA is the final code that's usually in a cell to make protein. So like I just talked about the paint on the house? The mRNA, think of it as the paintbrush. It's what's going to put the paint, prepare the paint to come out on the house. So Pfizer and Moderna are using techniques, a technology that can actually code for the paint, which in the case of the virus is the protein that belongs on the outside of a virus that allows it to invade a cell. The thing that helps it come through the door of the house. And so it's also the thing that helps it leave the house when it bursts the roof. And so it's really important when you design something that you think of that. So the big question everybody says is, okay, great, Dr. Cindy. So they figured out that it gets into the house and it changes the paint, and they decided to figure out how they can fix the brush to attack the painting process early. That's what mRNA is. Now, the trick with that was, do we just start all together making that? Or how did they come up with mRNA? People are like, how did they come up with that? Isn't that dangerous? They just came up with it. The truth is, mRNA technology is not new. It's been around now for well over 10 years. It's one of the technologies that's been studied, especially in the world of cancer and cancer therapeutics, cancer therapies. There are many researchers at the National Institutes of Health who have been working with those technologies for a long time. I myself worked with some similar technology when I was in the laboratory actively doing virology work on a day-to-day basis. I was also working with different viruses, but we were working with RNA, we were working with cDNA or copy DNA. We were working with a lot of different candidates, well over 15, 20 years now. So the first thing I wanted to help people understand is that the technology in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, not new. Similarly, the technology in the adenovirus vector, which is AstraZeneca's candidate vaccine, the candidate out of the UK Swedish company, is not new in terms of the technology, which is using a virus to code for the same paint so that that virus can infect a cell, create the paint, but not make more of itself, meaning you use a vector, something that can get through the door. And so they're using something called adenovirus. Adenoviruses are a family of viruses that, one of them, for example, is the one that causes pink eye, right? So adenovirus belongs to that family of viruses. Virologists have spent, at this point, almost 30 years learning how to strip viruses of the information that usually helps them be infectious and cause disease, and instead use them just as a camouflage, meaning on the outside it looks like a virus, but on the inside it's carrying any genetic information we need to express a certain paint without actually using it to become a part of someone's DNA, become a part of someone's genetic material. And so that's AstraZeneca's candidate vaccine, which is an adenovirus vaccine, versus mRNA, which is something just coding for the protein, the paint. It doesn't code for anything else. It in no way enters the part of the house that actually controls the things your body needs, meaning it does not enter the nucleus. Adenovirus also does not enter the nucleus of a cell. And so both candidates are safe in the sense that they're not going to reprogram your DNA. Neither of them is going to reprogram your genetics, your messaging, your personality, your identity. They don't reprogram anything. That's not how that's done. And trust me, I know how to do that if somebody needed to do that. And I'm telling you, having looked at everything, neither of these candidates do that. They don't do that. And so that's the first thing I want everyone who's listening to know, is that none of these vaccine candidates pose a risk to your own genetic code. None of them are going to alter your personality. None of them encode some special chip or listening device. They're all safe when it comes to your genetic material. So the next question about safety when you're talking mRNA and a viral vectored vaccine is, okay, so it's not going to reprogram me, yay. Can it cause me to get really sick? Can it cause me to become some person who develops an autoimmune disease, etc.? mRNA have not been demonstrated to have that property. mRNA designed vaccine candidates. Moreover, we'll talk about just what vaccines do in general, because I think there has been, for way too long, misinformation that's been spread, and for way long we probably have allowed it to spread a little bit by not coming out more vocally to explain what viruses can and cannot do, to help people understand that they're not causing certain diseases that people thought they cause. So that's part of the big question that everybody's worried about is it safe? Is it going to turn me into a new human being, change my personality, etc.? No, it's not. So then the bigger question is how come so quickly? So like I told you already, the technology already existed. So the first thing we're looking at is technology that was already existing, meaning we already knew at the base level how safe they were in general, how they could be used in human beings, what responses they could elicit. The big step was now figuring out what part of the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, we needed to really be stable enough to reliably replicate the painting process for the house so that we can reliably prime our immune system, the soldiers, to recognize the paint. And that was the challenge, because in some viruses, they mutate very quickly, meaning they keep changing the variation of the paint. And so you need, if you're designing a vaccine, something that won't cause the paint to change too often, or else our immune system won't be able to reliably recognize when we now have the real thing in our body causing an infection. And so they landed on the spike protein, which is the protein that the virus uses partially to enter cells. And that was the first thing. Now, typically, we tell people that vaccines take 3 to 5 years before we have a candidate. And I can tell you the answer for that. The answer for that is because typically the early years of vaccine development aren't being driven by pharmaceutical companies. And that's always been sort of the irony, I thought, in the movements that are out there suggesting that doctors and big pharma are in bed together creating vaccines. The actual truth is, for the longest while, a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies were not spending money on vaccine development. This is one of the first times where we're seeing such a coordinated, joint effort to bring a vaccine to market. And of course, it worked beautifully. I'm so impressed because I know for decades, we virologists have been trying to get pharmaceutical companies that have the big, deep pockets, that have the large networks to conduct clinical trials in multiple markets all at once, to help us get vaccine studies going so that we can move the science forward, move technology forward, and get these things going. Historically, for a vaccine candidate, you have a lab, a group of researchers working. They have to apply for grants from governmental agencies, grant from non-governmental organizations, not-for-profits. It takes time to get those grants. It takes time to get enough grants to fund these studies. For the first time, we were able to partner in this scale with these companies that have the networks so that we could design a phase 1, 2, 3 trial and push it across the country such that in 4 to 6 months, we can get enough data from over 40,000 people so that we can assess really right away, is this safe? And it's important for people to hear that, because I think when people hear that we have a candidate, they're thinking we only looked, well, not we, but those companies only looked at 100 people, 1,000 people. But the truth is, these studies were conducted across, in the United States, for example, the Pfizer study, over 40,000 people were recruited and enrolled in their vaccine studies. I know some of these people. Some of them were doctors. Some of them were my own nurses at my office who volunteered to participate in the vaccine trials that were conducted across the United States this spring and summer. And they were, I mean, it was remarkable how they did it, how it was coordinated. It was actually very transparent. And the data that's coming out now is also transparent now that it's finally released. We're not just listening to press releases from these companies. So it's important that everybody hears that. I wanted to preface everything so you can hear this, which is, what are the vaccines? How were they designed? How did they come about a candidate so quickly? Well, it's a matter of repurposing some technology that we already have, technology where we already had preliminary data on safety so we could know for sure how people would respond in terms of just putting it into their bodies. And then on top of that, we also had really good understanding at this point of how the virus enters cells, how it manifests, and how it takes over a cell to propagate itself. And so the goal was, okay, let's design something that can hopefully, if we can, prevent it from entering cells. But if we can't prevent it from entering cells, can we at least prevent it from propagating itself once it's in the body and prime the immune system to recognize when it's been invaded? And so that's what these studies did. And so far, all the data, that's been the primary endpoint that these studies have looked at, is what is the rate of progression to severe disease. Because like you've heard, in people who are not high risk, about 1%, maybe 2% of people who are infected with SARS-CoV-2, if they are not in the high risk groups, will die. The rest would have varying disease courses that may or may not land them in the hospital. But we do know that the ones who get very sick, we don't yet have therapies for those very sick. We don't have very effective therapies to prevent them from getting very sick. So the goal of the vaccine really was, how do we address the most critical issue that we face when someone is infected with SARS-CoV-2, which is if they develop COVID-19 and need to go to the hospital, the hospitals quickly become overwhelmed. We quickly have a crisis, as we're seeing across the United States right now, particularly in middle America, where many hospital beds are limited. They're reaching capacity. I mean, even here in the city of Las Vegas, we're approaching, I think, 90% bed capacity. 90% of our hospital beds are occupied during our peak that we're experiencing right now. And so those are the immediate goals of these first vaccines that were taken into trial, and now the data. So that's what they went in looking for. And indeed, the studies came back showing that somewhere between 70% to 95% of the people included in the studies did not have a need to, if they became infected after the fact, they didn't end up needing those serious interventions in a hospital. There were no deaths, most importantly, which is huge considering how many people have now died from SARS-CoV-2 infection around the world. And so it's really important that we have this information, really important that we talk about this. For those of you who are on Instagram, if you wanted to come over to Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, feel free. You'll get to see my guests who are coming on. I have Dr. Duke, who will be coming on soon. And I'm actually going to make sure that Dr. Shah knows that he can join us. So I'm going to send him the link. Dr. Shah, all you need to do is click on the link and enter your name, and then we can talk together. So those are the things. I want everyone to feel comfortable writing their questions here. As we talk, you'll get to hear whether I plan on taking the vaccine. You'll hear more on what my colleagues think about the vaccine candidates as well. You'll get to see how we have our conversations, which is, it's not a monolithic group think. Each person has their own approach to assessing the data. Even though we're using our own approaches, we're being very specific in how we read the data, which is looking at the science. And I think it's important for people to know that. I want you guys to feel comfortable entering your questions. We will aim to answer them as we go along here. I will also, if my desktop finally allows me to do everything that I want, we will even have you call in if you have a question, so that you can ask your questions live as well, anonymously, of course. You can do that anonymously. But honestly, today is to talk about the vaccine, to explain why we have candidates so quickly, to let you know that the candidates we do have are not farces. It's not they're rushing something on us and they haven't actually studied it. No. And the reason why we're able to get the data is because they were able to do a large multinational study as quickly as they were, because we were able to bring in industry partners who do have the pockets, who do have the networks, who do have the resources to move something like that so quickly, as opposed to the historical model of vaccine design, which was you had a researcher and their labs actively seeking excuse my language, actively seeking funding and grants to even be able to start designing their studies, then they'd have to take forever trying to recruit people from their local area. And so it's important that everybody understands why we're where we are, because I think a lot of the concern that people are expressing is not whether or not the vaccines might work, but whether or not we can that's out there. And so I think it's very important for everyone to feel confident that this is safe and you can, in fact, rely on what you're seeing. So as we go along, I'm going to bring in one of my friends now, which is Dr. Angela Du. Hi, Angela. How are you? Happy Sunday.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Happy Sunday, too. Great to see you.
Great to see you. So guys, Dr. Angela is also an obstetrician gynecologist. She does a lot of inpatient work. And so she's been very much on the front line, really there. She is here more in her personal capacity. She's not here representing any institution. She's expressing her views, and really, like I said, she's coming in to talk as someone who's understanding the data, but also as a mom, a wife, and a family member. How does she feel about this? So, Dr. Angela, what's been your approach so far to the information that's coming out about SARS and COVID-2 vaccines?
Well, overall, I'm just really excited about the progress. This is a huge step, and it definitely is going to be the start of moving towards better control of the pandemic and gradual control. Even as a physician, there's so much about biology and vaccine development that we don't learn in college, medical school, and our residency training. So I definitely understand why this is confusing for people who are non-physicians, because it's confusing for physicians. So it's been really helpful for me to be able to learn from colleagues, including yourself and others, about the development process of vaccines. And it's been really reassuring to know that this technology, a lot of it has been in place for many years. It's not a brand new thing.
Yes.
Another aspect that's been reassuring is to know that the viral sequence that was relevant to the vaccine has been available since the start of this year, actually. Yeah. So it's not as if it's just been figured out and then just in the last 2 months been able to be evaluated. So there's been just a very accelerated process because of the attention of many nations, governments, and funding. And that's why it seems so fast. And I think to understand that that's why it seems so fast, and it's not that steps have been necessarily skipped, is reassuring to me. And so I'm really excited about it.
I agree. And I think it's really important for everyone to hear that, because people are assuming that steps were skipped. And in the United States and in the United Kingdom especially, I can tell you steps were not skipped. Certainly, we know that one of the candidates, actually two of the candidates, the one that was introduced in China in the summer, and the one that was introduced in Russia, those countries announced that they elected to skip their phase 3 and to go straight into distributing it to their members of their military, etc. That did not happen in our case. These vaccines did go through all the steps. The reason why it seems accelerated, like you said, is because we had a group effort. And so we weren't relying, on just, oh my goodness, sorry. We weren't relying on just, and how OCD am I here in the world of SARS-CoV-2? I keep Purell at my computer desk, all over the house. There's Purell, because it's not that I don't trust myself, but why leave it to chance? And so, but going back to the vaccine development, yes, indeed, that's one of the hallmarks here, is that a number of countries got together, but also for the first time in vaccine development, we really had companies that had the resources, had the networks, get involved early on, because Pfizer is one of the big companies in the world. It's not a small tech company. It's not a small startup. They really do have a network The same for AstraZeneca. But these aren't companies that historically were big on research and development for vaccines. And so the research and development for vaccines were traditionally only happening at the academic institutions and the research institutes, which is why it takes so long. And so, very true. Now, Dr. Angela, I know you and I, we've had a lot of offline conversations, and we share some similar peer networks where the conversations have been really vigorous, really vibrant in terms of the vaccines, looking at the data, really dissecting the reports that are coming out and the figures. And I have to say, the Pfizer BioNTech work that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine this past week was impressive in looking at the difference in the curves between those study participants who got the vaccine and those who got the placebo, for example. And I suspect it's the same data. I'm sure it's the same data that the FDA experts and panels looked at. You and I were both on a CDC call earlier this morning where they were also talking about the CDC's view of the Pfizer candidate. And what was your take on looking at that data yourself?
I think it's pretty impressive, very impressive. I think that, well, not I think, but the data shows that they're in the study population, which might not quite reflect the same in the real world, but I still expect it to be pretty excellent. But in the study population, there was a 95% efficacy in preventing significant problems from the virus. And so when we talk about the disease, instead of calling it SARS-CoV-2, we call it COVID. Correct. So as far as significant COVID that led to undeniable symptoms, not necessarily hospital stay, but the person was feeling pretty ill or worse, about a 95% efficacy. And so I think that's excellent. I mean, it's one of the best performing vaccines. And even if in the real world, it turns out that it's close, but not quite that perfect, that's still pretty amazing. And so some things that we still don't know are, is it possible to have asymptomatic infection? But studies are ongoing and pending with that. And since we don't know if it's possible to have asymptomatic, there's still a chance that people, we're still figuring out if they might be able to transmit infection. My hunch would be, and I would defer to you as the expert, but if it's so successful preventing moderate and more severe disease, it's probably going to be pretty fantastic for all infection. Maybe not quite as good.
I think so. I think it's important though, because I've told everyone, including my mom, who grilled me last night about the vaccine. And it's really important to emphasize to people that most viral vaccines do not prevent transmission. But what they do change is how much you can transmit at once, or what we call the inoculum dose. And that's because if you just talked about, this virus bursting open the roofs and spreading more of itself, if you're preventing that much roof explosions from happening, then there's less viral particles, for example, in someone's sputum when they're talking, and aerosolization. And so the progressively smaller and smaller inoculum doses, then if that person and then someone who was exposed to them became exposed to someone else, your amount you're inoculating people with is less. And so in terms, even the ones who didn't get vaccinated, but we'll talk about that, will have a smaller inoculum and hopefully have a better chance at fighting it off before they get extremely sick. So that's the first. But the other is, if we can get a core number of people vaccinated, then we have a core number of people who won't get very sick, but who also have a less likelihood of transmitting a lot of virus. I think that's another thing that a lot of people have been asking, and I know you asked it too, which is, if someone got the vaccine, how quickly will they have some protection if they were then exposed to the virus? And we know for the Pfizer candidate, it's going to be at least 3 months probably, because the recommendation is 2 shots, right? 1 shot and then another one about 2 months later. And looking at the data, they followed people 2 months out from their second shot. And about a month after the second shot is when they saw true protective numbers. And why is that? Well, it's because of what we call a prime boost immune response, which is, if your soldiers see the threat once, some of them will remember it, but they have to see it a second time to really know, aha, this is how we fight it, and to really amplify their troops, their platoons. And so in that sense, the second time your body sees it, it really boosts up so that it can then fight later on. What we don't know, though, is how long you're protected for. That's still ongoing, that part of the story. But we know starting out, guys, people were protected. I think that's huge. I think that's huge. Now, Dr. Angela, I know you've got a busy day to go back to, but I have a big question for you. Will you get the vaccine? Are you planning to? I know I'm planning to.
I don't anticipate it being offered for me for probably a month or two, maybe a little bit more. And I'm feeling really good about the information thus far. And I think that length of time until I'm actually being offered it will allow me to add further comfort to my decision. I don't see myself declining it. So I think I will be taking it once it comes my turn.
I hear that, and you're a mom, so I imagine you're also looking at the information from a mom's perspective, which is, can my children get it? And I suppose we should share this, which is the Pfizer vaccine, which right now is the only vaccine that has been approved in terms of the emergency use authorization. What that means, it's a different process for the FDA, which is they're looking at safety and they're looking at the initial primary outcomes of the trials done so far. It's not full-fledged FDA approval. It's just use authorization because at least it's getting some of the job done. When they did the initial studies, they recruited for Pfizer, they did recruit people starting at age 12, but the emergency use authorization was actually for those 16 and older. And so currently the FDA's green light is for this vaccine to be given in special populations, high-risk healthcare workers to begin with, starting at age 16 and older. So given that, do you have anyone in that age group that you're thinking you might want to know more about, or how do you feel about that?
So for me personally, I don't have anybody in my close family in that age group. I don't know enough about the pediatric population to know, is there some intrinsic difference in that age group? In my mind, 16 and 17-year-olds are fairly adult-like. And so I would, total guess, but I would guess that the performance and the efficacy would be pretty similar. What are your thoughts on that? I hate to use the word guess as a physician.
Yes, no, I agree. And like you, I'm an OBGYN. So we help the babies come out, but then we sort of walk away. But I agree, 16 and older, and I suspect that's part of the rationale here, is even when we're prescribing medication, starting around 16, we start basing on adult dosing as opposed to doing the special pediatric dosing. And so I think that's part of the reason why. I think the other reason is twofold. I think one part is because children under 16, definitely those under 12, have overall been doing way better with exposure to SARS-CoV-2 if they're otherwise healthy compared to the adults and seniors in our communities. Certainly also, we know that very few people would say yes to administering something without knowing for sure that it doesn't have any developmental changes. And I don't anticipate the mRNA vaccines having any developmental impact on children. I absolutely do not. What was not studied, though, is women who were pregnant. There were not pregnant women included in the study. And so we don't know any information yet, but they're about to expand their study groups to include those populations. We do have some questions, though, asking about pregnancy and pregnancy planning, and I do have a segment coming up where we'll talk about that, because I do have Dr. Cindy recommendations, but Dr. Angela and I, like I said, we're both on an American College of OBGYN and CDC call this morning that did talk about how to approach vaccination and the conversation in those patients who are pregnant or planning pregnancy. And I have to say, I thought that conversation was spot on. It's exactly what I had been planning to talk about today in this live. And so it was wonderful that this CDC ACOG conversation happened today, and I felt good because I was like, yeah, they're on the same page, and this is what I was trying to talk about too. But let's see, Jarita Hagen says, sounds similar to getting HIV patients to undetectable viral loads. It's not that they can't transmit the virus, it's just less likely. Yes, Dr. Hagen. So if we are able to vaccinate enough people, even if they were to become infected, even if they were to remain asymptomatic but become infected, we would presume their body is able to fight it off faster. So for example, the first thing I would expect is it'll shorten the transmission window. It will shorten how much you're transmitting in terms of the inoculum dosing. And progressively, that means more and more people are protected, so less chances of exposing those who are higher risk or those who may not be eligible for the vaccine. Because there are some people, some groups who are not eligible for the vaccine at the moment. And so that's important to understand and really grasp as we talk about this ongoing. What information are you looking to, Dr. Angela, to really help you feel good about the vaccine? Not that you're not feeling good about it already.
Yeah, I think continued good outcomes, low complication rates. However, I definitely know it's important to keep in mind that there will be reports of issues. And honestly, a lot of those will be because life goes on.
Yes.
And a 60-year-old person or 50 or even 45 may have never gotten a vaccine and in a week had a heart attack. So if you get a vaccine and in a week have a heart attack, it absolutely doesn't mean it's because of the vaccine.
Correct.
And so we need to keep in mind, are we seeing higher numbers of complications than we would expect in a usual population?
Correct.
And the same issue has arisen. I think I've seen a lot on social media about a neurologic complication called Bell's palsy. Well, the overall complication rate was actually similar per the reports as a general population. So it's not, there's no reason we need to think it's because of the vaccine. And so I think just continued good news from vaccinated populations will just add further reassurance.
Correct. And, I really want people to know that for the vaccine biologists, epidemiologists, virologists out here, when the conversation started about a COVID-19 vaccine, we were hoping for a vaccine that's 60 to 70% effective. And that's what we were hoping for, meaning if you took 100 people and vaccinated them, we were hoping that 60 to 70 of those people would have some protection or not land in the hospital very sick. The fact that they are reporting, for example, with the Pfizer candidate, that if for every 100 people that got the vaccine, 90 to 95 of them did not have severe complications. That's amazing. That's amazing. And as Dr. Angela just said, even if when we really get everybody vaccinated, it turns out to be 60, 70, 80, we're actually going to be very pleased with those numbers. And I think in reality, it's going to be more 60, 70, 81, because not everybody is going to take the vaccine. Not everyone who gets the first shot is going to show up for the second one, even though they're recommended to show up for the second one. And why am I saying that? Well, it's because we have other vaccines that are two-shot vaccines. So hepatitis B, for example, is one. Chickenpox or varicella is another one. And the Gardasil, which is the HPV vaccine. And there are many people who, for one reason or another, forget to come get the second shot. If they're doing well or life, like Dr. Angela said, goes on, they move on or they change cities or they just forget. They forget that they had a second shot to get. And so we will see some variation because of that. One of the really amazing things that was announced during the CDC's session today is that they will have ongoing surveillance. So they will actively be tracking everyone who received the vaccine, and hopefully you will respond if you got the vaccine, but they will be reaching out to you at the 1 week mark, the 2 week mark, to see how you did with your vaccine. I think, what people need to know is vaccines are safe, but not only are they safe, but the technology we have today to track vaccines is so phenomenal compared to, say, the polio vaccine when it was rolled out in the 50s here in the United States, and that also changed the course of our world. Smallpox vaccine is a viral vaccine that changed the course of our world. I know there's some people out there who are hesitant because, Dr. Angela, they're saying, well, how do I know this is all I'll need? Am I going to need more vaccine later on? Am I going to need this every year? I don't want to do this if I have to need it every year. And my response is actually the flu vaccine is one of the vaccines we take every year. And so this will not be the first vaccine that people are being asked to take annually. I don't think you're going to be asked to take it annually, actually. And that's because the spike protein, that protein that is coded, actually the sequence is very stable. And so many times, the reason why you need frequent vaccines for a virus is because the vaccine is mutating or has a high mutation rate. The flu, for example, that's what happens. There's a lot of recombination that happens every year. We use like predictive models and all that jazz to help determine the best flu vaccine for the coming season. While they'll keep looking at it, so far the data that's coming out is showing stability in the spike protein compared to other proteins with the vaccine and the virus. Let's see. Dr. Angela, do you have questions?
So some concerns that you addressed in the beginning have been voiced by some people about concerns for the mRNA incorporating into our bodies, into our cells. And part of my understanding of that and the way I make myself feel more comfortable that that's not going to happen is kind of pulling on old science information that I've learned and speaking to colleagues. And my understanding is that it's such a complicated process for mRNA to be converted into our cellular data, DNA, that the chance of that happening is nearly impossible, and that the mRNA itself kind of goes away fairly quickly. Is that true?
Very quickly. So mRNA, like I said, is messenger RNA. Now, does our body make mRNA? I know for many people, based on what you learned in high school, college, for those of us who are scientists and physicians in medical school, graduate school, we know about mRNA the reverse, which is your nucleus, your DNA is transcribed into RNA, and then that RNA comes out into the cytoplasm, and then mRNA is created, and then proteins, or translation, meaning the reading of the mRNA code, turns into proteins that then become parts of our cells, our cell wall, or like the house. The mRNA can code for things in the house. It can code for the paint on the house. It can code for the roof. It codes for everything that makes up the house. Now, an mRNA vaccine, the reason why the technology is so novel, although it's not new, it's novel in that we're excited about it. That's what I mean by novel here, is when it gets into a cell, special cells take it up as part of the body's vacuuming system, right? So we inject you with mRNA and our cells are like, oh, well, that shouldn't be there. So those cells take it up, and then it gets into a cell and it's in the cytoplasm. It's sort of in the foyer. It never makes it into the bedrooms of the house. Think of the bedroom as the nucleus. mRNA doesn't go into the bedrooms. It stays in the foyer, and then it starts using what it has available there to code for proteins, in this case, the spike protein on the virus. And the body just naturally, it starts breaking down mRNA after a certain few we think maybe minutes to hours, right? But here's the other thing that's happening. The mRNA is creating proteins that are, like I said, the paint, right? The moment that paint hits the outside of the house, your immune system is like, oh, that shouldn't be here. It's going to destroy that cell. And so the mRNA within it is gone. That cell isn't hanging around because your immune system is like, oh, that paint doesn't belong to us. It needs to go. And when the immune system recognizes paint that doesn't belong to it, not only does it destroy what's there, but it then magnifies or amplifies the numbers of the cells that now know what that paint looked like, so that they're now surveying the whole house. They're traveling through your body looking for any more houses with that paint. And so that's the good news about the mRNA. The adenovirus vector is a little bit different in that it's going to bind to special receptors that our bodies already have for adenovirus. It's going to enter the cell, open up and release its RNA, not mRNA, it's RNA. And then that RNA will code for what then becomes mRNA in our cells. And the process, kind of like what's happening with the Moderna and Pfizer candidates, happens. The difference is with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, they're taking the mRNA into the cell already. Well, where the mRNA is going in already formed. With the adenovirus, it's going into the cell, and then the mRNA is going to be made by your cell. So yeah, I think, for those who are concerned, there's really, really no evidence, and that's not just from 12 months of data. We've known this now for well over 10 years that mRNA isn't going to incorporate into your genetic material at all. Any other concerns, Dr. Angela? I'm also going to bring on Dr. Vipul while we're on, so that, I know, Dr. Angela, when you need to leave, you just tell me, and we'll also get you going as well. But if you want to stay for the conversation, we can as well. Hello, Dr. Shah. How are you today?
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure.
It's very early in the morning.
And you're joining us from India today, correct?
Yes.
How are things over there? How are you guys doing?
We're almost at the end of the first peak, and we had a peak of around 150,000 people a day, and we are down to 30,000.
Very good.
We are down to 30,000. But then the question is, we know from the experiences across the world that this is not going to be, as hunky-dory as it is at the moment. So, we need to shore up our defenses, spread the word around that, people do become complacent. It's a natural process. And people need to understand that this ain't over yet.
It's not.
There's still, so much that's going to happen that we need to keep on shoring our defenses, not only across the communities that we see, but across homes as well, across workplaces, across homes.
Very true. And you have been sharing some amazing data and studies on your own personal Facebook. And we've talked about this because I've been very impressed with what you've been sharing, which is really emphasizing to people that the precautions you take don't just end when you go home to your house. You do have to take precautions at home as well.
Okay, so I can give you a small example. I do pediatric orthopedics. That's treating kids who are disabled. My wife is a gynecologist, and I have 70-year-old parents at home and 8-year-old twins at home. Since the last 9 months, my mother is asthmatic. And she's a little obese, and so we're taking a lot of precautions. So since the last 9 months, my wife is the only one going out of the bio bubble that we've created. She goes back to work. She's a gynecologist, and she has to look at emergency patients, as you understand. So she comes back home, and she goes into a separate room. So for the last 9 months, she's in isolation. She can meet our kids from 18 feet, and she can sit across and have a chat from not less than 10 feet, both masked, even at home. And that's in an open place. We have a balcony which is open, and across that balcony we can talk. And definitely we use technology to communicate. My kids can communicate to her with using Facebook and using WhatsApp and all those things.
And so Yeah, and you just described one of the things we have seen in the studies, which is multi-generational households having different layered risks, so to speak.
Yes.
And, you know, even in the CDC conversation that has started and some of the groups I'm in, the conversations that are ongoing is if you live in a multi-generational household, even if you believe you are not at high risk, you should consider getting the vaccine for the other people in your home and to protect them as well. And that brings me to my question for you, Dr. Shah. Will you get the vaccine? What do you think?
Oh, I have been at the forefront of the movement. You know, even in the medical fraternity, there's been a huge discussion, and people, started with, should we have the vaccine? And initially people were very tensed about uh, the virus,
Yeah.
and then slowly, as they started realizing that it's not killing as many people as they thought uh, in the first 2 months, they started becoming lax, and then the medical fraternity started questioning whether they would wait for the vaccine or not. So I
Yes.
have been very active in this field, and we did discuss with people all across the country, and I lead a group of approximately 600,000 people, healthcare workers, who
Yes.
petitioned the Prime Minister of India to get emergency use authorization for the vaccines in India.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we ha- yeah, we have at currently at this moment we're looking at the AstraZeneca vaccine, and we
Yes.
have an homegrown kill virus vaccine. So we have two, and we have others in waiting for enough research to bring us more confidence into others. But then the
Mm-hmm.
bigger question is, across the world, and I believe that very, very strongly,
Yes.
across the world, we need to move in fast to get people vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, uh, most vaccines take time to tick and bend the curve. Now,
Yes.
for example, in the US, you're potentially looking at a higher peak than what we are seeing now.
Correct.
Months ago, I said we would be looking at US crossing the World War II figures, and it has sadly
It has.
happened.
It
Uh,
has.
the way the US is moving, I'm fearful to say, and I regret to say that we may look at, more than 600,000 deaths over the next 4 months, which is essentially doubling the toll that we have now. The
Correct.
only way that we can do is, let try people to get vaccinated as fast as possible, which is happening, and I'm very happy to see that. But the other second point, I think, is across the political spectrum, people have to understand that it is just not vaccines, and they have to continue doing distancing and wearing masks, because that is, nothing will work till the vaccines stick in. For the
Yes.
vaccines to take in, they need time.
They need time. I really think that's part of why I wanted to do this live, because I started seeing people posting things like, "Oh, I'm getting my vaccine next week. January, here I come for travel," and I started realizing that the information isn't clear, and that many people believe it's, I get the magic shot today and next week I'm back to life as I knew it. I'm back to going outside, not wearing masks, entertaining and celebrating as I would, and traveling the world. But the truth is, we have a number of logistical issues. And certainly, Dr. Shah, you've been involved in logistical issues with the WHO and so forth, even as they related to certain vaccines. And I think we should talk about that a little bit, because I don't think, when we tell the glossy and amazing news that we have vaccine candidates, people assume that meant, life is coming back for the ones who believe it. And then we do have the other subset of the population for whom we have to convince that the data is believable. But we really have to explain, even if you got the vaccine, we're looking at 2 to 3 months for you before we know if you're in the 90 to 95%. And keep in mind, if we say 90 to 95%, you could be in the 5 or 10% who's not really protected.
Absolutely.
That's the first thing people need to understand, and I know this as a fertility specialist. Whenever I tell people percentages, they focus on the number that I say can give success and ignore the flip side, which is how many could be unsuccessful or negative. And I think we do need to emphasize that, but we also need to emphasize that every vaccine candidate has limitations in how much you can make at once, and for quality control purposes and etc. We're probably in the US, we're thinking maybe somewhere between 40 million to 60 million vaccines per month if we're lucky. But it's still a lot, and that's 60 million. Remember, you need 2 doses, guys.
Yes,
and so if you got your first dose, it's not all.
Yes. So, the first question is, people have to understand 2 things. One, the vaccines, even if you get a shot, the first shot is not enough.
No.
They have been, for example, even in, trials in India, there have been people who've had the first shot and who've thrown away their masks to be getting infected. So the first vaccine, though it does work after 10 days, the Pfizer data shows it starts working after 10 days and it starts making an effect, but that's not enough. That's the first thing that people have to understand. The second thing that people have to surely understand, and that's where we come into picture, that there's a bigger place of being responsible to the society. Just because you get the vaccine, you may still be a person who can be infected and transmitting that virus. So it's not just you, it's your community, your house, your community, your nation, and the world as a whole.
Very true.
That's a very important thing that has to be hammered again and again, and it probably has to come from all quarters, from all political quarters, from everything that everybody who the world looks forward, whether it's movie stars or all that messaging has to be very consistent.
Yes. And I think it's important that we do cover that in the messaging. And maybe as we talk about messaging, let's all 3 of us address some of the myths that are out there, because I think a big part of the messaging issue is debunking the myths. And there are so many myths, so here Megan Arn Elms is asking about one of the myths. She said, I had heard on the news that the United Kingdom is seeing some form of side effects in people who already have an allergy that requires an EpiPen. What can you clarify about this information? Do you want to take a stab at this on the show, or do you want me to?
I can take it. The question is, those 2 people, we need to be looking at all that data a little more microscopically to be coming at a decision whether they are as important as we thought. These 2 guys were NHS workers, and they were always with EpiPen. Now, I was working at the data, looking at as a knee-jerk reaction. The UK guys, the regulatory guys, said that anybody who's had any form of food allergy or any form of medical allergy, they shouldn't be getting the vaccine. Now, the problem is milk is a form of food allergy.
Correct.
And
but it's more sensitivity, not an allergy. 8%,
close to 8% of UK population has milk allergy. There's another 3% to 5% other allergies. If you add the drug allergies, it's another 44%. So if you add up all those allergies, it comes to be approximately 50% people. Now, can you, for all practical purposes, not have vaccine, have 50% people not vaccinated? That's atrocious, and that would cause a failure of any of those vaccination drives that is happening. So at some point of time, all these these knee-jerk reactions that are happening across the world will subside. The faster they do, the better it is for the world. Obviously, we expect 1 to 1.5 people in a million to have some form of allergic reaction. The question is that how will the general media, the public take it? At this point of time, there's a huge number of people who are interested in us failing at vaccination. The anti-vax brigade. Those people uh, are funded by a group of uh, countries. There's enough data coming up that there was a paper in 2018 which showed the anti-vax discussion across Twitter, across Facebook was manipulated by a few countries. It was manipulated by a few individuals who stand to gain from people not getting vaccines. So, it's a difficult situation. And at this point of time, that is why I have been always saying that it's the responsibility of the physicians to come forward, get vaccinated, do things like what you're doing on Facebook, on Instagram, and across all media to assure people that yes, they are safe, and yes, they work.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think, one of the things I like to explain to people is I know concerns are valid and I get skepticism. And I love when people present me with skepticism because it's an opportunity for me to present real data and facts and say what we know and what we don't know. And I think one of the issues that we've come to realize in the world today is we now call a lot of things side effects, which are actually just natural reactions to anything going into your body, versus when we call things allergic reactions versus sensitivity. So I think, at this point, let's talk about what you can expect if you get any vaccine. Like I said, when a vaccine goes into your body, the whole purpose is to prime your immune system to recognize that there's something that shouldn't be there so that when the real thing comes in, your body knows what to do. And so what does your immune system do when it sees anything? Well, one of the ways that your body alerts itself about something is it recruits certain cells. So you might have some soreness because it's recruiting inflammatory cells into the tissue that got the shot. So you might feel some soreness in the area where you got a vaccine. You may feel some tenderness for days. That's normal. Part of your initial immune response, or what we call your innate immunity, is anything that it thinks shouldn't be there, it tries to get your body to raise its temperature to address what it figures is foreign. By so doing, you can have a fever. That is how most of us know we have an infection, but it's really, even if you didn't have an infection, it's how your body alerts itself to say, let me address this. And so it's not uncommon if you got any vaccine for someone to spike a temperature or for someone to have soreness. For those of us who are lighter in complexion, you may even notice some redness in the area. That is common. It's actually recommended if you have that after a vaccine, you take some Tylenol or some ibuprofen. And I think people need to remember that, because that should be the approach, as opposed to saying, oh, I took the shot and I had a fever, they made me sick. No, actually, a fever spike following a vaccine is very common. It's actually very common. Now, if your fever is not going away, if you're having trouble breathing, etc., now that is when we start going into the question of side effect or reaction. But I think in many ways, people are not clear on how our immune system works. And as a result, when we're seeing natural immune responses, expected immune responses, we call them side effects and adverse effects.
I would, ask people to not consider fever as a side effect. I think that is a fair way of the body telling us that the vaccine is inside and it is working. It's sticking. It's causing your immunity to tick in and get ready for the fight ahead. Now, the second point that we need to understand is there's always a cost-benefit ratio. That cost-benefit ratio comes at the society level, it comes at the household level, and it also comes at the individual level. Individually, if I were to decide between getting a fever and staying at home, I would get a fever for 2 days and go out and work. For the society, getting a fever, for most people, we often do. The flu season is here. We all do have flu. We all have work days off, and then we go out and work.
Correct.
To get that tension out of your mind that you may get in needing to go to the hospital is a big tension. It's a big pressure zone. To think that you may lose somebody whom you love is a big pressure. And I think, getting a day of fever is a small trade-off for that pressure going off your mind.
Agreed. And for me, that's why I'm getting the vaccine. I'm getting the vaccine, yes, for myself, but I'm also getting the vaccine because I'd like to go visit my mom. I have not seen my mother since May because I consider her to be high risk. She definitely considers herself to be high risk. And so she will not have me visit her while I'm still working. And so I wanted the vaccine. I wanted to make sure I would feel comfortable taking it. And I've looked at the data. I've talked to my friends like you guys. I've talked to other people. I've availed myself of the information when it was published so I could go look at it. And I feel good about it. So yes, Dr. Cindy Duke is getting the vaccine. And you've heard the other doctors on the panel saying when it becomes available, they will strongly consider getting it as well. I would say now we'll talk more about patient populations and those special patient groups. So one is the one that Dr. Angela and I work with. Dr. Shah also works with pediatric patients. And as he said, his wife is an obstetrician gynecologist as well. And so we are working with some people who were not included in the study, which is the the pregnant patients or those who are under 6. For sure, under 12. And so what are the recommendations? Well, for right now, there are no vaccines available for children because that still needs to be studied. There's more data that will be required before that special approval, special consideration is made. I am saying to my patients who are pregnant, let's assess your risk. And the American College of OBGYN has agreed with that. The Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine is also on board in saying that the mRNA vaccine platform, the technology is safe, and so that the technology itself isn't considered to be in any way worrisome. We know mRNA is not going to cross the placenta and get through the uteroplacental barrier and infect a baby. So that's something that's important for people to hear. But right now, my recommendation is if you're not pregnant, just like I recommend to my patients who are planning pregnancy to get their flu shots, we check your measles, mumps, rubella status to make sure you're up to date. We check your varicella, which is chicken pox, to make sure you're up to date. And we recommend you get those vaccines before pregnancy. I am recommending that you get your COVID vaccine 2 to 3 months before trying pregnancy, if it's available to you. Yes, I am. If you are pregnant, then I don't think the viral candidate, and again, that doesn't really apply in the United States, but for those of you who are outside of the United States, if you are given the option for like the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is adenovirus vector, and you're pregnant, I will say no. And I'm pretty sure they're going to say that is not one of the groups that can take that candidate. But the Pfizer vaccine, I absolutely think if you're pregnant and you're high risk, meaning if you're a healthcare worker, if you're someone working on the front lines who is very much exposed, the risk of COVID-19 to you and your pregnancy and your fetus is so great that you should consider getting that vaccine.
It's a difficult situation, and everybody has to, as physicians, as patients, we have to take it on a case-to-case basis. Definitely, we've seen the virus crossing the placenta. Now the question is, what is more dangerous? Having the virus cross the placenta is more common than a vaccine side effect, purported side effects, I would say. I am sure that when we start assessing both, we would see that the vaccine would be more safer than taking the chance of having the virus cross the placenta. That's a bigger risk.
I think the risk of pregnancy complications, if you became sick, needed to be in the intensive care unit or needing to be delivered early so that you can get better, they're needing to deliver the baby early. When you weigh that risk versus getting the vaccine, that makes sense to me. Chanel is saying, why 2 to 3 months? Let me explain again. I just said that if you're planning pregnancy, you should take 2 to 3 months to get the vaccine course. And that's because first, the vaccine is 2. Yes, the vaccine is 2 shots. So you have to finish those 2 shots, which already brings you to almost 2 months in. And then you need at least a good 4 weeks following that second shot to have that truly protective effect before jumping into any even thought of, oh, I now have some protection. And so if you're someone who has that luxury, meaning you're planning pregnancy or you're undergoing fertility treatments, I would recommend getting the shot, getting it in that sequence. Alma is saying, how about for people who currently have autoimmune issues and are taking medications that lower the immune system response to viral infections? Would they be good candidates, or should they stop the medications that help their autoimmune issues? Alma, that's a 2-part question, and it also depends on the candidate vaccine. So I would tell you that in someone who's autoimmune, again, I would sooner say let's consider a non-viral vectored vaccine over viral vectored vaccine. But it depends on what your autoimmune situation is, I think, and it depends on which drug you are on. So it'll depend. If you're on a high-dose steroid or something, that's very different from low-dose methotrexate, etc. Anything to add, Dr. Shah?
Yeah, for those with autoimmunity, we looked back at how vaccines did over a large population, over a large period of time, to get an idea as to how they would behave. So there's a study coming down from Europe where they looked at a huge population for close to 10 years. And they said, if you are stable in your autoimmune status, then you can probably get a live vaccine. But if you're not, then you shouldn't. Now, what does that stable mean? If you're stable on your medications, you're not having any acute inflammatory conditions currently, you can probably. Now, the question is probably, and it makes sense. It's always a risk-benefit ratio.
Correct.
When you do get the vaccine, you're also protected against inflammation caused by the virus. That's a big thought process. Now, for people who have an autoimmune disease, and if they get some increased autoimmune reactions from the vaccine, which is a controlled dose of antigen, which is a controlled dose of the part of the virus. It's a tiny bit of the virus. People have to understand when they go out in the community and they get a shower of the virus, which is uncontrolled, there's a bigger, higher risk of them having side effects to that shower of virus in an uncontrolled manner than from the vaccine. So when you've had the vaccine, your body is primed to fight that shower better, and that would probably be the idea for an autoimmune person with an autoimmune disease. Having said that, it's a person-to-person analysis, as you and I both agree.
Yeah, no, I really think, Alma, and for anyone who is watching who has a chronic disease state that requires some level of immunosuppression, this is a conversation that I'm going to encourage you to have with your specialty doctor. So if you have an autoimmune disease and are being followed by a rheumatologist, you do need to speak to your rheumatologist here. Telemedicine, we now have established telemedicine. This is a lovely time to have that telemedicine conference with your rheumatologist and ask these questions. I think, if you're someone who's having lots of flares, well, you need to talk to your rheumatologist anyway, because you need to assess what's going on with your autoimmune disease and why you're having so many flares at the moment, and whether your medications need to be, addressed first before talking about the vaccine. We also know that in certain vaccine candidates, it's not that you cannot get a vaccine if you have autoimmune disease, but you might need more doses, actually. The dosing parameters change as opposed to saying don't take it at all. And so it's important to talk to your provider, and maybe if you're the one with autoimmune disease and you're not eligible for the vaccine, it's especially important to encourage everyone around you to get vaccinated so that they can help protect you. And I think that's the thing that Dr. Shah was talking about and Dr. Angela talked about, is when we're getting vaccines, we're not exactly only getting the vaccine for self. We're getting vaccines for those who we love, those who we may encounter along the way, for those in our communities who will not be eligible for the vaccine. We're doing this to help them. You're doing it also so Dr. Cindy can travel. So let's see. Well, guys, I really appreciated you joining me today. I appreciated everyone coming on. We have another question here from LinkedIn, Dr. Connie. And Dr. Connie says, how long must patients be observed after receiving the vaccine? Based on everything that's coming out of the CDC right now, you're actually going home the same day. You get your shot and you go home. But they are surveying people, so there's ongoing surveillance for 2 weeks, in that their plan is to reach out to you, ask how you're doing, so you can report anything at all that you sense as being different once you've had your vaccine, so that they can keep that database going. One of the interesting questions today during the CDC conversation was, is the vaccine mandatory? It is not. The other one, does the vaccine require informed consent? And as mentioned by the CDC captains today, it is not a requirement. So a consent form isn't required before someone gets the vaccine. Now, that said, I'm pretty sure most facilities will have you sign a consent acknowledging that you recognize you were receiving the vaccine and you recognize it could cause a fever and the usual things that we'd say to everyone. Have you say if you're a female or a person with ovaries and a uterus, whether you think you're pregnant right now or not. But there's no requirement for a special consent form. There is no federal requirement to get the vaccine. That said, I will tell you guys, I think, in economies that are what we call free market economies, a lot of employers will make it required that you need a vaccine to continue working, given how disruptive COVID infection can be in the workplace and in the business place. So that's going to be a very different conversation. But no, there's no mandate coming from the government or government entities at all. MJ Lighting on YouTube is saying, Dr. Cindy, what advice can you currently give for people with asthma? I don't know if there's something else, but I think it cut off. Contraindications. Well, similarly, again, asthma isn't considered a contraindication for the vaccine, for the Pfizer vaccine. If you're having a lot of asthma flares, you should be talking to your doctor to make sure, they figure out what's going on there. But asthma in and of itself is not considered a contraindication for the vaccines.
An interesting point here. My mom is asthmatic. My kids have childhood asthma, and and they're not going to school. And for the last couple of years, we've been talking about getting vaccinations, the flu shots for my kids. They do get it, but my parents don't want to, so they weren't getting it. But with everybody at home, my mom isn't needing her regular medications as high in dose as she was in the last couple of years. So probably, the infection that comes in from the kids, that's that's the reason why my mom used to get flares of asthma. So if you have an asthmatic condition, wear a mask, try not to go into the community till it is absolutely necessary. If you have a autoimmune condition, if you have something which can cause you having increased problems uh, with all these COVID issues, then it's better not to move around in the community without a mask. Absolutely not. And even if with a mask, it has to be an N95 mask if possible. And if not, then at least a surgical mask. I know the N95 is in short supply across the world. Having said that, uh, if you have a condition, autoimmune condition, if you have asthma, and if you're moving around without a mask, you are calling problems for yourself.
Correct. And we have some questions on Instagram, so let me ask those since they're here. So Bird Bash is asking, if you're doing an egg retrieval, can you take the vaccine during the process? I would say the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, which are the mRNA candidates, you should be safe to take those vaccines while doing your egg retrieval process. And that's because the mRNA isn't going into your egg. It's not going into the process that's creating the embryo. Certainly, I would hesitate when it comes to viral vaccines. If you're taking like the adenoviral vector candidate, then I would say wait, somewhere around 3 to 4 weeks, and we'll have more formal recommendations. But based on everything I know about adenovirus activity, I would wait 3 to 4 weeks from vaccine to doing your egg retrieval. In terms of, so that's egg retrieval. The other question though is actually getting pregnant. I honestly believe, mRNA vaccine is safe, so safe that we're not telling people to take birth control when they get this vaccine. And that should be your indication for how safe we think it is. We're not out there telling people to avoid conceiving when they get this vaccine. During the trials, they weren't advising female participants to avoid pregnancy, nor were they insisting that they be on birth control before they could be in the trial. And so it's important to recognize when we say we believe it's safe, how much we believe that. Not only that, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, which is the high-risk OB society here in the United States, actually is advocating not only for saying that the mRNA candidate vaccines are safe for pregnant women, but they're actively advocating that the pregnant women should be allowed to participate in the clinical trials. Because like I said, initially, to date, the trials did not include women who were actively trying to conceive or pregnant. The Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine is now saying, after reviewing the decade plus information that we have about mRNA technology, they're saying, you know what, it's safe. And I agree, the technology is safe. And so, yes, just like we're not asking our healthcare workers who are about to vaccinate to make sure they avoid pregnancy or make sure you're on a contraceptive protocol before you get the vaccine, same thing goes here. Do you want to add anything?
I agree.
Okay.
Okay. Can I make a point?
Yes, Dr. Shah.
Okay. I wanted to, looking at the logistic issues, with most hospitals full of COVID, with most facilities full of COVID, the chances of any woman getting a bed, if they land up in emergency room, is going to be more and more difficult in the next 3 months. if there's an emergency. Now, having said that, and if somebody gets COVID, heaven forbid, they need at least 4 weeks to 6 weeks for their immune process to settle down.
Correct.
Having said these two things, if we go back, the next 3 months, in fact, aren't the best times for anybody to think about conceiving. My wife is a gynecologist. I have a fair bit, and I treat cerebral palsy.
Yes.
Since I treat cerebral palsy, and since I know that a lot of this virus in pregnant women is crossing the placenta, I am concerned about what is going to happen in the kids who have placental transfer of the virus. We really do not know, even if there's fair information that 75% of women who get the virus are asymptomatic. But we really do not know that those kids that are born with the virus crossing the placenta in asymptomatic mothers has a problem or not. So, for the next 3 months, as somebody who sees cerebral palsy and developmental delay, if I were the person who was on the other side of table taking a call, I wouldn't probably take it.
Yeah.
It's too risky a condition.
Yeah. So are you saying, Dr. Shah, that if they're actively pregnant, don't take the vaccine? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying if they're pregnant, they should take the vaccine.
Yes.
But if they're considering pregnancy, this is not the time to be pregnant. It would probably be a better idea. Take the vaccine, wait for 3 months if you can, and then think of pregnancy. That's my thought process.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, if you're my patient and you say, Dr. Duke, I don't want the vaccine, I understand. I am not going to argue. I'm not going to fight. In fact, you have my word that at Nevada Fertility Institute, we will be wearing masks for the next 12 months. Even though vaccines are becoming available, I will be wearing a mask even after I get the vaccine. I'm not stopping my mask precautions.
Oh, yeah.
I will still be practicing social distancing and physical distancing. I am going to be emphasizing and encouraging my mother to get the vaccine. And she wants all the data. I was like, Mom, I didn't design the trial, but I made sure I gave her all the data, So you can be assured of that. At my office, some people, like I said, already got the vaccine because they were part of the trials. So we have some people at the office who already got the vaccine and they're still wearing the mask, right? They know they have protection because we tested them. And we know they have antibodies, etc., but they're still wearing their mask. And so you have my word that it's a judgment-free zone. And I want people to know that. But I'm also here to encourage people to understand that the vaccine is a safe candidate to take and why you should strongly consider taking the vaccine. As Dr. Shah so eloquently outlined just there, as someone who's planning pregnancy, when you take a vaccine, you're not just protecting yourself, but you're protecting your fetus, you're protecting your newborn. We know that newborns' immune systems aren't really primed until 6 months to a year. And so a lot of the maternal immunity that happens in the uterus during pregnancy, and if you're breastfeeding or pumping milk, there's immunity that you can confer or transfer to your neonate as well. And so that's why we check things and emphasize vaccines and encourage vaccines. But I also know I have some patients who already don't take a flu shot, already don't believe in the rubella vaccine and chickenpox, even though we've outlined how dangerous those viruses are during pregnancy. So I get it. But if anything, I hope today gave you more food for thought. I hope today presented you with information that helps you understand where the technology came from, helps you understand that this wasn't an overnight thing, even though it seems that way, because also, I mean, we've all lost track of time, right? I can't even truly place whether something was April or February anymore unless I have it documented somewhere, because everything is become a glum together. But mRNA technology, ending points today, mRNA technology is safe. mRNA technology has been around for well over a decade. mRNA technology does not involve any type of infection in your body. The mRNA is actually going to be picked up by special cells that then help your immune response to prepare for the real infection later on. It does not integrate into your own DNA. It does not integrate into your brain cells. It does not lead to infertility. It does not lead to miscarriage. It just does not. That video that was circulating with the so-called expert from Pfizer is not true. It has been debunked. It has been fact-checked. So much so that the real person who they were parodying there, he has made it clear that was not the conversation he was trying to have. And so it does not cause infertility. It does not cause sterilization. It does not cause HIV. I know there was one paper talking about adenovirus vectors. Let's be clear, there's no adenovirus vector candidate approved or given emergency use approval with the FDA in the United States, especially. That is not the case. But also, it does not cause HIV. What causes HIV is not practicing safe sex, not using PrEP, not having a conversation with your partner. Those are the things that cause HIV, not a vaccine, not a vaccine. Believe that, okay, guys? Believe it. And nobody's paid me to say that. And I'm someone who studied viruses and studied HIV now for 20 plus years. I'm telling you the truth here. It is a safe vaccine. It's 2 shots. So you need to take it over a 2-month period. It's going to take you 3 months before we know if you're truly, truly protected. Protection doesn't mean you cannot get infected. It just means that your body is going to have a better shot at fighting it off. Your body would have a less likelihood of transmitting the virus to others. Because again, I know people who are saying, well, why am I going to take a vaccine if my chance of getting sick right now is not very high anyway? The reason why you're taking the vaccine is so that your chance of spreading the virus in the long term, when we have the long-term data, I expect it to show that your chance is decreasing if everybody else is vaccinating as well, who is eligible for the vaccine. Those are the big things. And if you're planning pregnancy, consider getting your vaccines done before pregnancy if you can. Guys, do you have any closing statements that you'd like to share?
I just really appreciate being able to be part of this panel, and I've learned a lot as well still from you and Dr. Shah in these last couple hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angela. And again, guys, Dr. Angela was here in her capacity as an obstetrician, a mom, a wife, and an avid follower of the COVID data and studies.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Dr. Shah. Well, everybody, bye. We'll be back later in the week to keep talking about these things. We'll also talk about Moderna vaccine some more when we have the EUA conversation that's going to come up for Moderna soon. And then Dr. Shah will be back to tell us more about those vaccines in India and his current push for getting emergency use approval in India as well for their vaccine candidates. Right, Dr. Shah?
Yes, surely. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, everybody, bye.